everybody, welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard. And before Matt gets in with anything, I'm going to ask him a question. And because he's just published a really interesting article on Dive Photo Guide about the classic Nikonos RS autofocus 13mm fisheye, a lens that's talked about in very hallowed terms amongst underwater photographers, and about how you can use that lens on modern Sony mirrorless cameras. So it's a Nikon underwater design lens on Sony mirrorless cameras. Very exciting. Tell me more, Matt.
All right. So this right here is the actual water part, or the port water contact part of the lens. So that's the part that you normally see, and then there's an actual lens itself. But anyway, my good friend Isaac Szabo, we can probably link his stuff in the video here.
Yeah, I'll definitely put it underneath in the description. Yeah.
So he took it upon himself a few years ago to figure out how to use the 13mm lens on his Sony cameras. Initially, it was a bit MacGyver-y, and it worked, but not great. And he had to do all sorts of funky custom stuff to make it work. And then in the last year or so, he figured out, just by coincidence, he chose a Sony lens, the Sony 50mm 1.8, and it just so happens to perfectly fit all of the optics from the lens part of the 13mm. So he took all of the optics of the 50mm out of that lens, put the 13mm optics into that lens, and now you have a Nikonos RS 13mm fisheye lens in the body of a Sony 50mm lens. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a quick question. How did Isaac get so clever? Has he got engineering background or? Not
especially. He's a tinkerer, and he likes to figure things out. And he's the nicest human being in the world. And he'll try to explain some of the things he's doing to me. And I am not an engineer, so a lot of the stuff that he tries to explain goes way over my head. But he's very patient. He tries to explain it anyway. I
love Isaac's photography as well. Actually, a bit of showing off, but our pictures are actually next to each other in this year's Wildlife Photography of the Year exhibition. So it's kind of sadly he didn't come over for it, but it was kind of, he was like, it's in the wildlife photographer. You always have kind of a night, lots of receptions and things, and during those, you often stand by your picture and you chat to the people whose pictures are nearby you. And so you get very familiar with that layout. And in the exhibition at the Natural History Museum in London, Isaac and I are side by side all this year. So I've never met Isaac, but we're buddies from that exhibition.
I'm sure it will not be the last time he is awarded in that competition. So he might have another.
Yeah, I love his photography.
But so he figured it out. So he took that all apart. Then he decided he obviously had to do something with the water contact part of the RS lens. So he removed that from the old body and built custom ports around it, which apparently is much easier than I had anticipated it being, at least for Isaac.
Yeah.
So he now has ports available for Nauticam and Sea Frogs. He is working on Isota, and there will be other housing brands available based on demand. So if anyone has Marlux or Seacam or whatever, those could be an option. You'll likely have to send him the housing as well, though, so he has something to go off of. But he's made some really exciting changes to the lens itself. As you know, the 13mm is revered for amazing image quality, especially for a fisheye lens, and especially for something that's so tiny.
Yeah.
Normal fisheyes, they do suffer an image quality hit behind tiny domes. Sorry, Naia came in here, so she's chilling on the floor.
Yeah, no worries.
So normal fisheyes suffer a bit of image quality loss behind tiny domes. One of the advantages of the 13mm is that not only is it extremely small, as I showed, Isaac actually managed to shrink the size further. So the diameter across is a little over 3.5 inches. And it does not suffer those same image quality losses as a normal fisheye behind a mini dome. Another very exciting development is that you can now shoot it at essentially wide open apertures and also not suffer any sort of image quality loss. So if anybody reads the article on Dive Photo Guide, there's an image in there of my girlfriend, and it's shot at f2, and it's razor sharp across the frame. The edges are sharp, which you could never do with a normal fisheye behind a dome, unless you have absolutely nothing in the corners of the frame.
I think especially for like deep rec photographers, cave photographers working with hardly any light, that's going to be so exciting.
Definitely. And even for a lot of the stuff I do a lot of dark.
It's dark in the rivers and springs.
Freshwater stuff. So being able to open that aperture and not worry about an image quality loss and being able to keep your ISO lower, faster shutter speeds is really, really nice. Probably the most exciting thing he's done is and you'll have it on your version, I don't have it on mine yet, but he has made...
My wife might be watching.
He has made a distance optimization guide or key on the lens. So you can actually, you'll have it available underwater where you can, depending on how far your subject is from the front of the glass, and you can guesstimate it, of course, you can now set that distance on the lens itself, and it will optimize the image quality at that distance. It doesn't degrade it at other distances. It just makes it even better at whatever distance you're shooting it at. So if your subject's at a foot, you can set it to that distance on the lens itself, and now your image quality at a foot will be
the best it can possibly be for the lens.
Exactly. Yeah. But if I don't have that. I have to set it ahead of time on the dives. But there's no loss in image quality if you are shooting something at 2 feet and you had it set to 8 inches. It's just not as perfect as it could be. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there's a couple of things I was going to interject with, but perhaps more for the casual viewers, in that you're kind of making this episode for me. And I've just realized that, maybe people aren't so familiar with the history of this lens. Nikon made underwater cameras from the late 60s, early 70s, all the way through till kind of the late 90s. And during the 90s, their last iteration of their Nikonos series was very different from the previous ones. The previous ones were largely mechanical viewfinder cameras where you couldn't look through the lens. You were basically hit and hope a bit with the shooting. They had very good optics, but they were completely mechanical. What they made at the end of that series was the Nikonos RS, which is one of these. And the Nikonos RS was an SLR camera designed to go underwater. And for this camera, they made 4 different lenses. And one of those lenses was the fisheye lens, the 13mm fisheye lens, which worked on this particular camera and this camera only. And it was those lenses were the first autofocus lenses for underwater photography that were corrected for underwater photography as well. So they weren't designed to work in air. In fact, they don't work in air. And a lot of people buy one and go, oh, my lens doesn't focus. Oh, I've bought the wrong thing. And it's like, no, it won't focus in air. It will focus very, very close in air. But, you have to go underwater to see it work properly. But that means its optics are superior to anything else underwater. When the Nikonos RS died and everyone went to digital, these lenses sat on shelves and, collectors bought them more than anyone else, but they were generally worth peanuts. And then actually in probably about 10 years ago now, about 2013, 2014, a couple of different guys around the same sort of time, both claimed to be the originator, and I'm not going to get into who was first, figured out a different way to convert them to work with Nikon SLRs. So you could actually now use a Nikonos RS lens on a Nikon SLR and use it underwater. One of the adaptions meant you had to have an adapter in the port, and you actually just put the original lens on. And the other adaptation actually cut the lens in half like Isaac did and made a separate port and a separate lens for it. One problem of both of those corrections, they both work very well, is that the aperture range from the lens didn't report properly to the camera. So you couldn't actually use the lens on auto exposure because it would actually expose incorrectly because it was sending the wrong numbers to the camera. So you had to always shoot it on manual exposure. It would autofocus fine, but you had to shoot on manual exposure. For underwater photography, that's not a big deal. We shoot manual most of the time anyway. But it also reported apertures incorrectly, which you had to kind of have in your head the conversion range. One of the conversions also didn't open up the full aperture range. So one of the conversions would allow it to shoot from f2.8 to f22. The other one actually only worked from f2.8 to f13. So you couldn't actually shut it down more than that. And a lot of people don't realize that because their lens reports the wrong aperture, so they don't really realize what it's going. So things that excite me about this is actually the lens now has some tweaks to the optics to make it even better. Not that I think anyone feels they need that, but it's, you know, potentially even better. And it now correctly reports apertures and things like that. So you can also use it for auto exposure shooting. One reason you might want to do that is that small footprint size of this lens and the great quality makes it fantastic for big animal shooting. You know, whales and things. It's really easy to move through the water. And I can see, you know, a camera like mine, the a Sony camera, relatively small housing, small little lens on the front, great image quality, fantastic cetacean bait ball camera. You know, really fast through the water, really streamlined. And then also, you know, of course, that small footprint size, wonderful for close focus wide angle, but you also know you've got the quality there for shooting bigger scenes and everything else as well. So it's a really exciting lens. There is a but coming up, but
no, that's one thing I wanted to say though, is you touched on it, was the close focus ability. So the original RS lens wouldn't focus all the way onto the glass unless you removed that little back filter, which then you actually told me about because it screwed me up in Iceland. If you remove that little back filter, it won't focus at infinity. It'll only focus very close.
So I screwed up your Iceland trip? Or?
No. I screwed it up. You told me how I screwed it up after I screwed it up.
I'm glad. I was getting worried there.
No. So what
it's normally our friend Byron who screws up people's Iceland trips. He's the cause of all the trouble.
Yeah. One of the cool things that Isaac has done is now that the lens will focus all the way onto the glass. And because the footprint is smaller, it's even better for close focus wide angle. So if you can shoot something that is touching the actual port, which the original version couldn't do. And again, you can optimize the distance on the lens itself. So if you have something touching the port, you can set the lens to 0 and focus it across. It'll be sharp all the way across the frame, which is really, really cool. So
I haven't tried the lens yet. Maybe we'll do another episode when I have. But I'm really interested about, you know, using this secondary distance scale to basically flatten the field of focus at the distance you're shooting. It sounds really exciting to use to, you know, to get but also it's something that you don't have to get too stressed about because if you just leave it alone, you still have the lens that's better than everyone else's lens anyway.
So I haven't gotten to use it underwater in terms of optimizing it. So I am excited. I'm going to send him my lens probably next month to get that done. But I can still shoot it very close, and compared to what you could do with the old lens for close focus wide angle, it's night and day, which is really nice. But yeah, like you said, big animals, low light environments, all that kind of stuff. There's nothing else that's going to be able to match it really.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have something like 600-700 shots with that lens on my website. You know, it's just, you know, it was my go-to for forever. You know, it was, and it just, you know, it wasn't compatible with my new system, so it's been laid up. So I'm really, really excited to get it back underwater. And you know, what's great about it as well is because it's small, you can justify taking it on every trip.
Yep.
You know, it's not like, oh, that's a bit heavy. This is, you know, it's a really, you just always bring it. And it's always there when you need it.
Oh, it is. Just that.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Very small.
The but, though, which I think is really important to say to people, is Nikon didn't make that many of these, and they made even less 13mm fisheyes. There are still people who have them in collections and don't want to sell them. There are plenty that have been scratched and lost down the years as well. I've been trying to find a scratched one to buy, actually, because I have a friend who says he can make the front element again just by he knows someone who makes ground glass, and he said if you've got one to copy, you can just make another one easily.
Wow.
So I was kind of trying to find some scratch ones, but I tried to find some scratch ones and no one had one. So they're really hard, and so there are only so many. People are still using them on Nikon SLRs. People have adapted them to work on RED cameras as well and things like that. So they're widely used in the filming world. And there are only a relatively small number of them made. I have no idea the number, but I suspect we're talking hundreds, certainly low hundreds, I would suspect. So there aren't very many in the world anyway. And I think that's the main limitation of the lens, is that there's this amazing optic, but not everyone's going to get one. Yep. And what we saw was, once they were suddenly adaptable to the Nikon cameras and then also to the video cameras as well, their price went through the roof. So they were selling for peanuts. Literally $100 would get you one, 18 years ago, and suddenly 10 years ago, suddenly their price just was, went from hundreds to thousands to find those donor lenses. Unless, of course, you happen to find one that someone who doesn't know about all this is selling, and they do turn up in old camera shops and things like that, where someone has maybe died and a relative has taken their gear in, and it's just been put in the camera shop and no one knows what it's worth, and it's just all being sold for a few $100. So you can get lucky, but there are very few around. Yeah,
and they're still showing up on eBay. The range on eBay is anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000. So they are on there, but I know at least 3 that have been snatched up just this week. So they're going faster and faster.
Well, yeah, I think because they work on Nikon SLRs, but you can't adapt them to a Nikon Z in their current form, in their SLR form, because of the way they work. So people who had them kind of realized that they could no longer have them if they wanted to stay Nikon, but go from SLR to Z. And I think that as a result, that some were sold because people were like, oh, I'm no longer using this. I might as well get some money for it before its value drops too much. And yeah, it was a small-term dip in the market, I think.
And one thing that I've been asked a couple times now, and I'm actually going to try it this week, is if this will, because there are adapters that allow you to use Sony lenses on the Nikon Z bodies, I'm going to go to my local camera shop and see if any of the adapters allow the Sony 50mm with the 13mm optics to work in any of the newer Z cameras. I
think they will. I mean, I don't see any reason why it won't.
So as long as
don't tell the Nikon guys until we're
so we will eventually report back with that as well as to how they work on Nikon, and maybe somehow somebody in the field can eventually test one and let us know. But unless you have anything else to add to this, I think that's probably a good place to wrap this one up.
Yeah, no, really, 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 and thank you for telling me all about it. I found it really exciting. It's always been a favorite lens of mine.
And I think we can probably put the review link into the description as well. We can put Isaac's info there if anybody out there has one or wants to get one converted. You can email him or reach out to him on his website. But other than that, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next one.